Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I'm going to make a statement that every time I make it, it rubs a lot of people the wrong way, particularly people who have either paid for macros or for people who sell macros for a living. And before those people listen, they'll usually jump up and say, well, I'm not listening to a fat guy tell me about nutrition. Well, no one's talking about getting contest rep. If you are trying to get contest rep, you absolutely need to hire someone to help you do that. Most people are not psychologically going to be successful on their own, and I'll go so far as to say as paying for macros probably is not going to be enough. You actually need to pay someone to help you with the psychology of it, because it will actually drive you insane if you're not careful. And everyone who's ever got really ripped knows this. They understand this. It causes all sorts of psychosis and psychological roadblocks with your brain, trying to prevent you from starving to death. So you do need to hire someone who has a lot of experience. All right, and by a lot of experience, I would say if you really want to get ripped, don't hire someone who has worked with less than 100 people getting them ripped. Preferably someone with a psych degree, because that's actually what you need. You don't need a nutritionist. Now, that being said, let's talk a little bit about macros. The reason I say that it's a complete waste of time to pay someone for macros is that people, because macro counting and if it fits your macros movement, people have gotten to the point where they actually think the exact macros that they consume, a certain amount of carbs or fat or whatever, that it makes some massive difference in their fat gain or fat loss. And the truth is, most of the time it doesn't. And I'm not saying they're not individual responses, and I'm not saying that going to either extreme will not have certain consequences that you have to be aware of. Because I mean, literally, if you fill all your non-protein calories, almost all of them, or at least 90% of your non-protein calories, with completely fat or completely carbs, you probably need to know what you're doing at that point. Right? There are special considerations at that point, but the end result will probably not be much different in terms of your fat loss or fat gain, for that matter. And that's what the data and the science show us, and actually basic biology show us that. What I would say is that if you pick one or the other, you probably need to be fairly consistent, because your body makes adaptations. What do I mean? People who run basically ketogenic diets, over 50% fat, pretty much the rest coming from protein. In some cases up to 80% fat, 20% protein. People say, well, that can't work. We don't have the carbs. Well, actually, once people get used to that, glycogen stores and things don't become that big of an issue. We could argue that some people from a training fuel perspective don't do as well, especially in a calorie deficit, depending on the person. Okay, there's a lot of considerations there, but they actually adapt. And people who even say, oh my gosh, all that saturated fat's going to make their cholesterol look terrible. Actually, it doesn't. They actually tend to have really good blood work when people do that once they adapt. They actually have lower inflammation because they have less saturated fat in their blood. Their body burns it. In other words, here's the problem with macros. Whatever you feed your body, the most of it tends to get good at burning it. For a primary fuel, once a deficit is there, it cuts into your body fat and or your muscle mass. Okay, so don't assume that because you're burning mostly fat, your fuel, that you're going to burn more fat when you're in a deficit. That's not necessarily true. In fact, you might find that you burn more muscle, depending upon the situation. Same thing with extremely high carbs. And again, I'm assuming people are eating mostly whole foods. I'm not talking about people filling in and doing junk food diets of any of these versions, okay? I don't promote that. I don't eat junk food for the most part. I don't promote that people eat it. I think that shocks people because I'm not ripped and I say that I don't eat junk food. I don't eat refined foods. Those are special occasions, social occasion things. I don't have them in my house, and I go weeks at a time without even seeing them. Like actually literally seeing them, unless I'm in a grocery store, okay? Or at a restaurant. It's usually the only times I see those things. I don't buy them. So we're talking about whole foods. Well, the same thing exists if you were to go mostly carbohydrates. Usually your training's quite good. You have to be leery of vitamin deficiencies, essential fatty acid deficiencies, and if your fat goes too low, you're going to have to supplement essential fats back in. Something like cold milled flax seeds. By the way, yes, it needs to be milled. Whole flax seeds, you do not get the omega-3s, or you're going to have to add fish oil or something back in. Notice only one of those is a supplement. You can buy cold milled flax seeds. Actually, I have a freezer full of cold milled flax seeds myself. So that's your options. But what happens? You adapt to it. Usually your training's pretty good. More carbs usually equals slightly better training, especially in a deficit. All right? But people then assume, well, does that mean you won't gain? No, you gain fat in a surplus too on that. You just have to be aware of the deficiencies you can develop, because we could argue from an anabolism perspective that the higher carb might be better, might be slightly better at nitrogen retention and things overall, slightly more anabolic, but you are at risk of vitamin deficiencies. It's probably the best choice for overall body composition if you don't care about the satiety and the other benefits of the really high-fat diet. High-fat diets are more enjoyable. But you also have to be aware of deficiencies. If you have to pay attention to those things very carefully if you go with an ultra-low-fat, high-carb approach. Here's the problem. They both work. And if both of these two extremes work, if they're looked at carefully, what could possibly be magical about any ratio anywhere in between? To the point to where you're going to pay somebody to tell you how many of each to eat. The two extremes where you almost completely exclude one or the other of those macros actually does still work. So what is the macros really about? It's about calorie deficit and getting enough protein. Okay? Here's what I'm going to suggest. If your goal is weight loss, weight gain, or whatever, and unless you're quite an extreme individual, why would you pay anyone for macros? Are they going to update you every week? Are they going to look at your body weight and the trends in your body weight and assess you week to week? Because if they're not, you could do that yourself and do a better job than the person you're paying. People say, what do you mean? Well, if you figure out real quick from weighing in on the scale that your maintenance calories is 3,200, throwing that number out there, and you lose weight on 3,000, you quit losing weight on 3,000 because your total energy turnover needs to slow down, you're going to have to cut to 2,800. Okay, you're going to have to do that as you go. TDEE, which is total energy expenditure, is dynamic in nature. The amount of calories that you choose to eat is going to control how much weight you gain or lose. I don't recommend that people gain or lose weight rapidly on purpose, either direction. Small changes. Just in the general trend of your calorie intake, and keep your protein really high. Whether you're trying to gain muscle or lose fat, high protein is a good idea. And I know people throw out that number, 1 gram per pound of body weight, as if it's not a magical number. It's a good baseline starting point. It's a good safe spot to aim for. We could argue about the exactness of it. Now, people get ludicrous with that. What needs to be done for a pound of lean mass of body weight? Do you get a DEXA scan every month? If you don't get a DEXA scan every month, how do you know your lean mass? Shut up. You're being stupid. And you're acting as if a fat person might not need more protein because they have a higher energy turnover also, and they might need the protection in a deficit. And they probably would benefit from the extra satiety of the higher protein. You're being counterproductive. Shut up. You're being stupid. You're requiring people to have to gather more data and make it more complicated and do something that might actually be counterproductive even if they did it, because you're going to lower their protein. I can tell you right now, lowering protein because someone is fatter is not the best way to control their appetite. Not the best way to hold their muscle tissue in a deficit, so you need to shut up with that stupidity. Oh, based it on lean body weight. Oh, great, you have to spend $100 on a DEXA scan every month just so that you can eat 10 less grams of protein. Stupidity. But back over to the point. Calories and protein are what matter the most. That's 95% of your body composition changes. The exact macro count of literally 300 calories difference in your non-protein, whether it comes from carbs or fat, do you really think, based upon the examples we just gave this hard, do you really think that's going to matter? Is it going to make a measurable difference in your body composition? How you feel 300, the last 300, 400, 500 calories of that? Probably not. Probably not in a meaningful way. Not a measurable amount. People are going to pay someone to give them those ratios. as if they actually know what they're doing, or instead of just making it up with a personal philosophy that they go with. All right. And you can't even count your macros and calories perfectly anyways with the technology you have in your home. A digital scale won't do that. It's going to get you within 10%. It's all a ballpark. It's a ballpark estimate that if you get it close enough, consistently close enough, you will get the results that you are seeking from the diet end. The main thing is making sure that your diet is mostly whole foods and you don't develop deficiencies. Okay, and that's more important than macros. And that's the other thing. Most of these people who are writing your macros, they're probably not writing your full meal plan. And if you get stuck on some meal plan that someone else gives you, God, my God, you better be in contest prep before you start doing that, or have a serious disease in which you've hired a registered dietitian to fix you. Otherwise, that's also ludicrous. Alright guys, well that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.